Hello, I'm Sarah De Jong, the Director of Supportive Care at Cancer Council Tasmania, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session about managing the emotional impact of cancer. Before we start, on behalf of Cancer Council Tasmania, I would like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet here today in Hobart, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We also extend that first respect to other First Australians present today and viewing the recording of this session. I'd also like to acknowledge all Australians impacted by cancer and their loved ones, because that's what we're focusing on today. Today's session is about managing the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis. And we know that a diagnosis of this kind has far-reaching impacts for the person diagnosed and the people that love that person. We do a lot of work here at Cancer Council Tasmania around helping people with coping strategies and looking at how they can set boundaries and look after themselves during a cancer diagnosis through treatment and beyond. And today's session, we're really focusing on that topic, and we've got some amazing guest speakers here for you today, and we're really excited to run this session with you. I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors of a project that we've been running, and this webinar is part of that project. It's called the Online Community Cancer Connections Project, and that's been funded by the Tasmanian Community Fund, who have generously given us funding to run a 3-year project where we run online complementary therapy programs. That's yoga, Tai Chi and mindfulness. And again, that's all about helping people manage the distress and emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis. And we're also running a series of webinars as part of that project. So a huge thanks to the Tasmanian Community Fund for giving us the ability to run this project. Without the support of our community, we can't do the work that we do here at Cancer Council Tasmania. So our gratitude is very real. So before we start with our guest speakers, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the services that we provide here at Cancer Council Tasmania. And we do support any Tasmanian impacted by cancer, and that includes people with a diagnosis, partners and loved ones, because we know that the impact goes far beyond the person who actually receives that diagnosis. So our supportive care team provide a range of supports, and that can be sitting down with a person individually to talk through the impact of that diagnosis and treatment. And we have cancer support groups as well, and other peer support options for people who are going through that experience. We also, if you're someone who doesn't like to talk so much about your cancer experience, but likes to be around people who understand where you're at and to kind of reduce the loneliness of that experience, we have some activity-based group supports as well. And the photo up on the screen is showing one of our walking groups, which is one of those activity-based group supports. And social support is really based in the research, like everything we deliver here at Cancer Council, that social support is so important. Cancer can be a very isolating experience, so it's really important to come together with other people who understand what you're going through. We provide a range of practical supports, things like our wig library that operates statewide, and various financial assistance programs are in place as well. Not to mention our Transport to Treatment program, which takes people undergoing cancer treatment from their home to their treatment centre or hospital and home again afterwards if transport is an issue for them. Our complementary therapies run in our support centres and online, and that's yoga, mindfulness, Tai Chi, Pilates, and we run oncology massage in our centres in the north and south as well. And it's also available in the northwest for people in the community. And we provide a lot of education and information about cancer. A huge need for people with a cancer diagnosis is to get that information that they can trust is based in the most recent research. And that's what we really rely on here at Cancer Council. So you can trust our resources and education, and we run information sessions and workshops throughout the year as well. So please get in contact with us if you'd like to know anything about any of those services or if you need support. So I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Claire. Claire is a dietitian and yoga therapist based in Nipaluna, Hobart. In her business, Food and Body, she offers a holistic approach supporting individuals to achieve their goals through combining nutrition, movement, breath, and rest practices. I like the sound of rest practices. Claire offers individual consultation in person and online, small group yoga classes, and a short course, Building Better Bones, that develops bone health through the whole body approach. We feel really privileged to be working with Claire, both in this webinar and for some other sessions for our clients. The best contact is through her website, www.foodandbody.com.au, where there are more details, recipes, and social media links if you're interested in knowing more about Claire. So now I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Claire Sullivan.
Thank you, Sarah. So what I would like to chat today about is food and its effect on mood. So with regard to food, it's like what we eat, when we eat, and how we eat and drink can all affect our mood and our mental health. And what we eat being the starter, and what we choose to eat is affected by many things. And if we're thinking about illness, then how we feel in our bodies can be particularly important and relevant around this topic. So what our appetite's like, whether we're constipated or had diarrhea, what our energy levels are, and of course, what our mood is like, if we're feeling a little depressed or angry or upset or even happy, it'll change the foods that we choose. And so the foods that we choose are going to then affect our gut, and I'll talk quite a bit later about that, our sleeping habits, our nervous system, where we're anxious, feeling a bit depressed, and how clear our mind is. So because we're making choices about our food, we're having a really significant effect on our mood overall, just by those choices that we're making. So to optimize all these areas of sleep, our nervous state, our immunity, which we're all trying to optimize, there are several things that we can focus on in relationship to our food. So the regularity of our eating, staying hydrated, managing our coffee and alcohol, getting enough protein, and looking at our gut. Now, the first 4 of those, you might notice the effect of those quite immediately. The latter 2, so our protein intake and looking after our gut, are things that have a sort of like more of a long-term effect. So you need to work with these for a little bit longer to be able to see any difference. And they're the 2 that I'd like to hone in on most. So I will skip quite quickly through the first 4 and then focus on the last 2 most significantly. So the regularity of how we eat can affect us quite directly. If we're hungry, but hunger is triggered and identified in different ways for different people. And things like feeling tired, being irritable, and even, depression sometimes can actually relate to not eating very regularly. So although you might not feel hungry in that sort of traditional way, it may be that it's necessary, if you're having any of those feelings, to be looking at how often you're eating. And I would really strongly recommend to people that they do start their day with having just a little something. It doesn't have to be a big breakfast, but if you're, feeling a bit listless, then and tired, then starting off the day with a little something, snacking rather than big meals. And while eating a healthy diet is always encouraging, whole grain foods and nuts and seeds, but avoiding too much sugar too. So if your high sugar intake will give you a variable sort of response to being tired and lethargic. So staying hydrated, the best way to see whether you're drinking enough is how often you're weeing and the colour of your wee, just to be very blunt about it, because it can affect your mood and energy levels and give you headaches. So while we might be drinking extra by having teas and coffees, I'm going to talk a little bit about caffeine later. But we do want to stay hydrated, and I would be definitely encouraging water in various forms, whether it be as a soda water, whether you flavour your waters, having decaffeinated drinks, maybe sort of herbal teas. So then we'll move on to number 3, which was the caffeine. So caffeine can affect our nervous system, and you'll feel that perhaps quite directly. What I would like to suggest here, while if people are feeling a little bit agitated or anxious, that perhaps, and they're drinking a bit of coffee or lots of tea, they may be thinking about, you know, why they're drinking, or what are other ways to satisfy that need. So there are lots of really good decaffeinated coffees around now, and teas and herbal teas. And in relationship to caffeine, it's important to recognize that the effect can be 6 to 12 hours later. So it's not an immediate effect. So you want to just have a little check on when you're drinking your last cup of coffee. So for example, you might like to finish your coffee at midday, and just because, you know, it's going to last for 6 to 12 hours, so that takes you right into the night. So perhaps if you're thinking caffeine might be a bit of a stimulator for you, then perhaps trying to go without it for a couple of days. And while many of us will enjoy a glass of alcohol, it can affect our mood a lot. And so you want to think about why you're drinking alcohol. What are the alternatives to this? And there are lots of substitutes, lots of alternatives. So there are trying an alcohol-free day, reducing the amount, and trying mocktails. There's some great mocktail recipes out there, so have a little try that. That could be quite fun. So protein and the effect of protein on our bodies is not so direct. And when we're not well and not eating our regular patterns, then protein intake can be quite low. And not only is it going to affect our muscle strength and body build, it can also affect our moods and how we're feeling quite directly. So, you know, I've suggested perhaps snacking. One of the difficulties with and the negative effects of snacking can be that a lot of those snack foods are not going to be very high in protein. So I would really highly recommend for people that they try to have a little protein at each snack or at each meal. So the foods that we have that have got protein in them are things like nuts and seeds, legumes, eggs, dairy products, fish, and lean meat. So lots of ways that you can get little snacks, including some of those. So lastly, the point I was going to talk about is our gut health. So in terms of looking after our gut, it's about the microbes in our gut. So digestion of food is in 4 stages, really. It's our mouth, our stomach, our small intestine, and then our large intestine. And it's in the large intestine that we will find these microbes. And there has been quite a lot of discussion across the board over the last few years when there's been a lot of research into this area. And The thing that the microbes do is they do their final breakdown of food, and therefore the absorption of many of the nutrients from food. They produce vitamins themselves. They help our immunity. They help control our blood sugar, our blood fats, and our blood pressure. And they produce neurotransmitters, which are chemicals can help with our sense of well-being. So hormone transmitters that are called GABA, you might have heard of this, dopamine, and also serotonin, which is sleep, which is something that many of us have difficulty when we're not well. So looking after your gut is really important for those reasons, as well as for bowel regularity. And all of these factors all are going to have an effect on how we're feeling. So what are these gut microbes and how do you affect them? So probiotics you will have heard of, probably being recommended to have a probiotic, which you'll get in a tablet in some way. But probiotics are the microbes. The microbes grow in our gut, and so they need food. And the food comes from what we offer it. And what it needs as its food source is whole grain products and particular components of whole products. So that the prebiotics, what we eat, produces the probiotics and all those health benefits. So the prebiotics come with fruits and vegetables, cereals, nuts and seeds, legumes. And the probiotics you can find, well, in your gut, but they also produced in particular products like fermented foods. So yogurts, Yakult, kimchi, tempeh, sauerkraut, miso, some soy sauces. You need to just have a little look on the label of that just to make sure that it's fermented. And also the prebiotics in tablets. So the type of diets that are very high in these sort of foods are the very traditional diets. So Mediterranean diet, which has been recommended for general health, heart disease, and diabetic diets. So we're quite familiar with that. Japanese diets, Norwegian diets, which are high in seafood. And what I'm going to talk very briefly about is the ModiMed diet. Now, the ModiMed diet is the result of research that's been done here in Australia, Deakin University, actually in Victoria, by a Professor Felicity Jacker. She's written a book called Brain Changer, and the diet has been based on the Mediterranean diet, hence the name. So before I talk briefly about that, I'm talking about whole grain foods and wholemeal foods. How do we make a distinction? And what does that mean? So you can break food down basically into 3 different ways of processing, either minimally processed, unprocessed, processed, or ultra processed. And when we're talking about whole grain sort of products, we're generally talking about minimally processed and processed. Because you can see from this list here that some products like wheat, we have to process to use. We have to process it to have flour to then make our bread. Carrot juice, any sort of fruit juice is going to be good without all the additives in it, of course. And is although processed, is quite a basic source of that food. It's when we get to ultra processed where the fiber's been taken out of the food and lots of additives have been added, whether they're fats, sugars, preservatives, or additives. That's what we're wanting to minimize. Because we want to minimize those because our bugs do not like those components. And so when you're looking at food in the supermarket and you're not quite sure what it all is, my simple guideline is to identify a ultra-processed food is that if the product has ingredients in it that are not in your cupboard, it's ultra-processed. So just try and select foods that have ingredients that you're really familiar with, yeah, and that you might have in your cupboard. So that was the prebiotics. If we're talking, prebiotics. If we're talking about probiotics, many probiotic foods will not have any identification on the label, because the only way it can allowed to be identified as being high in probiotics is if it has a certain quantity, and that's quite high. And so you can see this is a label and how you can identify that something has got is quite high in probiotics. Now, you would also notice from this that it says that it's free from all those other additives. Okay, so that's quite a good thing to be looking for as well, because sometimes there's a sort of a mismatch between, you know, having one ingredient that you're looking for, but also having all these other perhaps not so desirable ingredients. So the ModiMed diet. So I won't go through all these little steps here, but it's generally a healthy sort of diet that we have been, as dietitians, been talking about for quite some time. I think the two things that are quite interesting out of this are number 4, where it talks about eating a lot of legumes, and also number 8. So there's an encouragement here to be eating or including a considerable amount of extra virgin olive oil in your diet. So that people who followed this diet for some months actually showed, you know, a significant percentage of them showed a significant improvement in their mood. And what I would like to just talk very briefly about now is the legumes, because I think in our diet we don't include traditionally legumes in our way of eating. And so thinking about including legumes as a small regular addition to our diet, it's a good source of protein, and it's going to be great for our microflora, our gut bugs, and therefore how we're feeling. Now, the negative, of course, with legumes and beans and stuff is that many people can find that they, you know, cause wind and discomfort. What the advice is, and it works, is to start off in small quantities, you know, just a tablespoon, a couple of tablespoons. So, for example, putting a little bit of beans in your salad, you know, like having kidney beans or chickpeas or some lentils in salads, making dips and having dips on biscuits. You know, so it's a good snack, it's high in protein, interesting sort of flavors and combos, and also great in fiber. Putting split peas, lentils in soups. And there are lots of recipes around. They all have different flavors, different textures, different colors. So it's really something to experiment with. So just here, just the references, if you're wanting to follow up with this book that I'm referring to, Brain Changer, it's an easy read. There's recipes in it and a simple explanation of extension, a lot more, of what I've been talking about with gut. There's also a reference there that's worth following up with, and just my website, because I do have some recipes on there which can help get you started with ideas. So we just very briefly covered those sort of 6 areas, which all can have significant effect in terms of how you're feeling. But how do we go about getting to this point? You know, we need to be working to optimizing this. So in conclusion, what I'd just like to suggest is that we take small steps. so that you identify perhaps an area that might be worth looking at. So you might decide that you want to drink a little bit more, or you might decide that you want to investigate whether you're having enough protein in your diet. So just take, one step at a time. Diet change takes a while. So plan ahead, make sure you've got the right food in the cupboard, make sure you're you've got the right equipment for preparing meals, etc. Keep a little note of the changes you make. We very quickly forget, 2 or 3 weeks later, that we've adapted a new little pattern. And it's nice to be saying to yourself, well, I've made this change, this is great, rather than saying, I should be, I must. Get support. So try and ask your family, friends, medical support to help you with these changes. And then finally thinking about other aspects of how we eat. So sharing meals, cooking with others, eating with others, all really important. And I haven't discussed any of that during this thing about food, but that is so relevant with the whole food discussion, is those positive effects. And as a little step out of my discussion with food and moving on, also think about food in terms of your approach to it. So thinking about it mindfully, we can get a lot of joy out of food by the way we look at food, the color, enjoying the colors of food, enjoying the smells, the fragrances, the appreciating the taste, going slowly. So being really sort of thoughtful about and going slowly and being thoughtful and enjoying food, making it a joy. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. It's fascinating to hear about the relationship between our well-being and what we eat. And I think it's very easy to forget that some of those changes can be made that impact your body and then have that knock-on effect into your emotional well-being. Also acknowledging that for a lot of people going through cancer, eating and making changes to diet can be difficult, and the impact of cancer and side effects of treatment can make it a bit of a tricky space. So please do consult with your doctor or treatment team if you have any questions or doubts around making changes, or if you're having any difficulty with eating or finding that joy in food, because there are things that can help you with that as well throughout your treatment and get you back into that enjoyment of food eventually as well, because it can be a huge loss for some people, that sort of joy that comes from food and sharing food, if you're really feeling so unwell that you're unable to eat in the same way as before. And always be kind to yourself, and any small change, any step that you're taking in those directions is a positive. So always, take a moment to pat yourself on the back and acknowledge those changes that you are making. So thank you, Claire. Really interesting information that we can all take something from. So our next two speakers, we've got Amika and Miranda, and they're going to, I think, talk a little bit individually and then come together for a bit of a chat. So I'll introduce the two of them now and then leave you with them. So Mika Tabbert is a medical practitioner based in Nipaluna, Hobart. After initially working in hospital medicine and general practice, she worked in occupational medicine for more than 10 years, and then in 2011 became a medical advisor with the Australian government. She joins us today as a person affected by cancer and is going to share some of her personal story. 2 years ago, aged 47, Mika was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. Our other speaker coming on with you shortly, Miranda Stevens, is a clinical psychologist and mindfulness teacher joining us from Ulverston in Tassie's northwest. Miranda runs Mindfulness Programs Australasia, a Tasmanian organisation providing free programs for adult Tasmanians experiencing stress, anxiety and depression. We've been extremely lucky to have Miranda facilitating courses for the Cancer Council for the past 2 years, and the impact of that mindfulness training has been incredibly powerful for us in the supportive care team to witness in our clients the difference that can make, to take on board some skills and strategies around managing that stress and anxiety and depression that is so prevalent during a cancer diagnosis. So I'm very delighted to hand you over now to Mika and Miranda.
Thanks very much, Sarah. As mentioned, my name's Mika, and I was absolutely delighted when Cancer Council Tasmania asked me if I would like to take part in this webinar, because if there's anything I can share from my cancer journey and my journey with emotional well-being that might possibly help others, I would love to do that. 2.5 years ago, when I was 47, as Sarah mentioned, I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, which is also known as stage 4 or advanced breast cancer. It's where the cancer has spread to other parts of the body. The cancer had spread to a lot of my bones, and I needed a hip replacement, radiation treatment, and then ongoing multiple drug treatments, which I continue today. I had not had an invasive breast cancer before this diagnosis of metastatic breast cancer. 2 years before the metastatic breast cancer showed up, so 4.5 years ago now, I'd had what is sometimes referred to as breast precancer or ductal carcinoma in situ, DCIS, which was treated. And nobody, myself included, expected metastatic breast cancer to be on the radar. The emotional challenges began one evening 2.5 years ago when I presented to the emergency department with sudden inability to walk on my right leg. The X-ray and the CT scan showed that my right hip was eroded with disease. I went into emotional shock. I distinctly remember my mind going into denial and disbelief. They must have put the wrong patient details on the X-ray film. That can't be my hip. And then the emotional meltdown, calling my mum in tears at midnight, saying, "Mum, it's not good." My world turned upside down in an instant, and my life was never to be the same again. I was admitted to hospital that night, where I stayed as an inpatient for 2 weeks, having every test under the sun, and then surgery to replace the eroded hip with an artificial hip. There have been many, many changes and challenges since then. More operations, significant treatment side effects, including very painful joints and tendons, and going from being premenopausal to suddenly completely menopausal, with all the changes that brings to the body and mind. Ongoing tests and appointments, trips to the emergency department, physical limitations, driving limitations, inability to work. I couldn't live in my home for a time because of the stairs. Challenges and changes to my social connections and networks, some of them very unexpected and painful, and the list went on. About 6 months after my diagnosis of metastatic breast cancer, I was diagnosed with depression, needing treatment with antidepressants and regular psychology appointments. Since then, I've also experienced chronic insomnia and gained enormous benefit from an online cognitive behavioural treatment program for that. I've also experienced stress and anxiety, and I've had to consider and prepare for my mortality. So how have I coped with all this? Sometimes, to be honest, not very well, but gradually over time, and with the assistance of supportive friends and family, cancer support groups and carefully chosen health professionals, I've built up and I continue to build up my internal and external resources to help support me along the way. I think of it as being a bit like creating the best conditions you could for a garden to grow, and then maintaining and adjusting those conditions so the environment is as good as it can be to nurture the garden's growth. Returning to mindfulness practice has been a particularly important resource for me. I first learnt about and trained in mindfulness practice about 10 years ago and have found it incredibly beneficial for developing calmness of heart, clarity of mind, attunement to myself and others, and focus and alignment with my life, values, and purposes. But my practice has been pretty patchy over these last 10 years, and I've noticed two traps I tend to fall into. The first one, I don't have time to do it. And the second, I'm fine now. I don't need to do it anymore. With the first trap, I don't have time to do it, I now think of it as being a bit like saying, I don't have time to breathe. And the second one, I'm fine now, I don't need to do it anymore, is a bit like saying, oh, I've lost those kilos I gained over the Christmas festive season, I can eat whatever I like again now. But at every point of challenge or crisis in the last 10 years, including being diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer 2.5 years ago, I have returned again and again to the practice of mindfulness. And each time it's felt like coming home. I'd now like to share some slides with you. If we could have the first slide. Pursuing my creative interests has always been an integral part of who I am, music, writing, and photography being key. Becoming absorbed in these to the extent that I can now with my cancer has also been an important part of attending to my emotional well-being. This is one of my favourite photos of a peace cairn I built from small stones. Next slide, please. These are some key messages I wanted to share with you. Firstly, you and your emotions matter. Reach out for help. If where you're reaching isn't working, try reaching somewhere else. Build your internal and external resources. Prioritise your time and energy on what works best for you. You and all your emotions matter. Next slide, please. Sometimes challenging emotions creep up on us, I find, and we might not really be aware of what's happening, but just feel out of sorts or grumpy or irritable or tired or stressed. I've found it helpful to use what I've come up with and called my AAA approach for managing emotions. That is, through kind awareness, which I find mindfulness practice very helpful for, to acknowledge, accept, and attend to all my emotions, the AAA approach. As an example, when it became too difficult to sit on my lovely couches, which were now too low, too soft, didn't support my painful back, I had great difficulty getting up off them, my practical, logical mind decided it was time they went. So I selected a charity to donate them to and arranged a day for the truck to come and collect them. But the day before the truck was to come, I didn't feel quite right. I knew something was up. So I sat down on my lovely but now impractical couches and did my AAA practice. Through sitting quietly and gently breathing, I realised that I was sad to have to say goodbye to my couches. Just yet another of the many losses and changes brought on by my cancer. And as I acknowledged and accepted my sadness, I attended to my grief by shedding tears and gently running my hands over the surface of the couch seats that I'd sat on, laid on, read on, watched TV on, chatted with friends and family on for many, many years. And I thanked my couches. Out loud, I spoke to them. I remembered how I'd selected them in the shop, and I thought about how much I'd enjoyed them for all those years. And after a time, the tears stopped, and I felt ready to part with them the next day. And when the truck turned up, I was ready. Next slide, please. We all have caring roles to play, whether professionally or personally, in our jobs, our families, our friendship groups, our neighbourhoods, or our communities. I wanted to include this slide as a gentle reminder of the importance of taking the time to care for yourself first, so that you can then be there for others. And this flying metaphor being fit your own mask first before assisting others. Next slide, please. I'd like to share this poem I wrote about 20 years ago now, which seems as poignant now as it was then. It's called Meditation. It's time to take the time again, to stop and feel the breath within, to close the eyes and see once more truth residing at the core. It's time to shed the tears of pain, shake off the grime of lies and shame. It's time to set the spirit free in nakedness, to learn and see the truth within, the truth without, the truth of fear, the truth of doubt, the truth to see, the truth to be, the truth to feel, the truth to breathe, to step again with lightened feet, the path where heart and mind can meet, the path that nurtures the body whole and births again the creative soul. And final slide, please. Some images of what managing emotions throughout a cancer diagnosis means to me. A gradual and an ongoing, often repetitive process of moving from this to this. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mika. So much. That's amazing. And I really appreciate this opportunity now to ask you a few questions and realise that while we've already discussed that it would be okay to not answer some of my questions, just to reaffirm that you've been so open already, and psychologists like to sort of dig into things here. So I might just ask you a few questions, but please feel free to just answer in the way that you want, or to pass if you need to. And if you like, Mark, yeah, we could even I'll come to my slides in a little while. But Mika, I wonder if you could take us back, if you don't mind, to where you spoke about the emotional shock when you first got your diagnosis. And because we know that that can be just so overwhelming, and sometimes the mind might be going really fast and we can't think and take information in, or we might just, sort of be going so fast that we can't pay attention. Do you remember back then what emotional shock was like for you in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I really do, Miranda. And I've had subsequent experiences where the mind has not been able to function well because of overload, or emotional or cognitive overload as well. I think at that initial point, it was literally like the brain was seizing up, just going into complete shock. It was impossible to think logically, rationally. Information that was presented to me came, went, was nowhere to be found again. Couldn't retain information. Emotions were very, very raw and at times overpowering. And sometimes it was just kind of a freezing as well, where it was just too much for the brain to cope. I remember in that 2-week stint when I was in hospital initially, after several days of multiple tests, and trying to understand and cope with what was suddenly happening to me. One evening, I couldn't. My brain had too much. It was absolute overload, and what I ended up doing was watching, just in the hospital bed on my phone, a Disney movie in order to just completely take my mind away from all the sort of pressure and stress of that moment. And it was just what I needed at that time, because my brain had had enough. It was it really needed just to stop and chill out.
Yeah. I really like that, listening to yourself about that too, because to me that reminds me also of when you said that we have our internal resources and we have our external resources, and sometimes just completely needing to get out of our own mind and body, watch a movie, or you sort of mentioned your photography or listening to music, just as a way to just give ourselves a bit of a rest. That's sounds like some really wise strategies. Yeah. And it also sounds like you're obviously a very intelligent person, being a medical practitioner, and we all have our own types of intelligence. But it also sounded like when you were in that emotional shock that you couldn't really access all of that information and find the words even to talk to yourself. Did it feel a bit like that brain wasn't working properly?
Yeah, for sure. Funnily enough, different things have happened at different times. So there was that initial shock, which really kind of shut down a lot of brain functions. And then as there was some level of adjustment, and that's become one of my favourite words, I think there's this ongoing process of adjustment to the multiple new normals that keep cropping up. I found that I then went into, once the brain was starting to work again, I went into this quite industrious, practical mode of, to-do lists and working my way through them. And in fact, what happened was the emotional processing, the emotional attention to emotions kind of got shelved a bit. And there was so much going on, appointments and new treatments and lots of fatigue. And so you're really just trying to get through the basics of every day. And I tend to think that's why the experience of depression sort of hit later on down the track, because once all that sort of busyness of treatments and appointments and lots of treatment team involvement, once I was kind of on my own again with it, then the emotions kind of went, hey, what about us? Would you like to? We're here too. And they spoke to me big time. And then I really had to start paying attention and attending to my emotions, which had kind of, been shelved when there was a lot to do.
Yeah. It sounds like you're in really just survival mode. How do I cope with all of this, and what does that practically mean for me, and what do I need to do, and headspace, because of all of that we have to sort of shelve some things, I guess. And then there is such a strong emotional component with all of this too, that it has to be attended to at some stage, I guess. And I think that's what maybe you're saying about, you said stress at sometimes, and then that depression, that strong emotion just showing up and needing to be tended to at times. Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind me asking you a little bit more about that, the times when you did feel quite low as well through that, did you have times where you just even maybe struggled to get out of bed, or just really didn't feel like seeing anybody? And how did you manage to get through that and survive through that?
Yes, all of the above. So it's quite interesting to sort of, think about and that person, that me at that point in time, literally difficulty getting out of bed, completely withdrawn from other people. I almost didn't see what the point of continuing my cancer treatment was. It was a very, very bleak time. And I think I'm eternally grateful for family, friends, and psychologist I was seeing, and calling Cancer Council Tasmania, who I spoke to on the phone a number of times, connecting with people who really cared, really understood, and stayed with me during that time. I had some family come and stay with me, so I wasn't alone in the house. Those things were very, very important to help ride through some of the bleakest moments. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hear a lot that sometimes not everybody who we feel close to is able to still be there for us when we do get a cancer diagnosis, that sometimes that's a struggle for them. I don't know if you have any thoughts about how do you manage when people who you think might respond in one way don't?
Yeah, I'm really, really pleased you raised this, because when it first started happening for me, I was shocked. I didn't know what was going on. I thought this particular friend or this particular family member would be right there for me. And when that wasn't really happening, I just couldn't believe it. It wasn't until I watched a cancer webinar where people with lived experience were talking about this phenomenon that I kind of went, oh, okay, so it's not just me. this happens. And then I was able to start sort of working through that. And I guess what I needed to do was to firstly look around and just notice who actually was stepping up and being there for me. And it's interesting because, things shuffle and change. Sometimes some people are, because of what's happening in their own lives, they're more able to be there for you at a particular time, and others might not be able to, either because of time constraints or perhaps their own reaction to my diagnosis. So I think I found it really important just to look around and kind of notice who my support group was, and be very grateful for that, and tap into those people, even if I was kind of thinking, oh, but I kind of thought you would be there for me right now. So it is a loss, it is a change, needing its own attention in terms of sadness and perhaps grief if there's a change or a complete loss of a relationship, a friendship, from the diagnosis. And so that needs attending to, I found. But then becoming aware, as I said, of who is there, and realising that this is, an experience that can happen to to people going through this sort of situation. Yeah, but it really was quite confronting. Not something I expected at all. There are so many things that happen that you don't expect. It becomes expect the unexpected with a cancer diagnosis, but this was truly something I didn't expect at all. So yeah, I came up with a little saying, I guess, that I would say to myself, that you know, I choose to keep the door open, but I no longer go chasing the wind, which was my way of saying, you know, my heart is still here and the door's open if that person or those people are able or choose to re-engage. But I don't have the energy or the strength to go chasing the wind, and I'll tap in with those who are much more obviously able to be present for me.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, thank you so much. You mentioned that mindfulness has been helpful for you in different ways. Has it been helpful in times like that where you've, you know, had to really work through some emotions and acknowledge that they're there and feel them, which is not always easy, but then also you're talking about being able to do that, but plus also notice the positives that are around you as well. So has mindfulness been helpful in that way? And if so, you know, practically how?
Very helpful. One of the big challenges I've found with my cancer diagnosis and my ongoing cancer journey is the holding of disparate things or two opposite things at the same time. So here's a change, a loss of a relationship, a friendship, or some aspect of my previous life. And here's something beautiful and joyful and a wonderful relationship. So mindfulness has sort of helped just settle the system being my body, mind, whole being system down, in order to not always latch onto the negatives and be able to notice and cherish the positives. And so in my mind, it's that, you know, holding that duality, that sort of the good and the bad, life's always full of that. And being able to cope with the bad, but also really engage with and feel the full benefit of the good.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Has that taken a bit of practice for you to be able to like open up to the good? Because I know we have this negative bias in our brain, so we do tend to, and particularly when there's a sort of a threat to your physical self or something, we tend to, you know, really sort of get a bit focused on that, and we can't help that in a lot of ways. So have you had to like intentionally look for the alternative or practice that?
Yes, I think intentionality is a key word. You know, I think it's kind of weird to say, but, you know, if you are intentional about taking care of yourself, attending to your emotions, noticing the joys in life in the midst of what might otherwise seem to be a lot of pain, it is possible for that to happen. And I think that's where we can sort of take a little bit more control over ourselves, our minds, our emotions, not be sort of caught up and spinning around with what's going on, either thinking or feeling. But and mindfulness I found very helpful with this, just to kind of slow things down, step back a little bit, and actually become aware and notice what's happening. And definitely requiring practice. So yeah, none of these things have kind of gone, you know, oh, one mindfulness session and then, oh, yep, great, kind of got everything under control now. I think it's an ongoing journey, and definitely for me, practicing mindfulness regularly helps me maintain a sort of a grounding and a clarity and an ability to sort of see things for what they are and find my inner strength, I guess.
Oh. Wow, thank you so much. Yeah. There's an awful lot to soak in and think about. Thank you for providing all of that information and again for being so open and generous with your own story about that too. Yeah. I guess there's a few key points from what you've brought up today that I wanted to show some slides about and just talk a little bit more about. But before we do that, Mika, is there anything else that you can think about now that's going through your head that you would like to add to? You might not. I'm putting you on the spot here.
That's okay. Maybe just one other thought is I have a little phrase that I quite like saying to myself, and I do talk to myself. I find it quite helpful, and talk back. You know, it's sort of you know, it's useful if you're by yourself or people around you are not quite able to be there for you. You can be there for yourself and talk to yourself as if to a loved friend. But a little phrase I sometimes use is the isness of being. You know, this just is at the moment, and it'll pass. You know, if it's difficult. So yeah, without sort of getting caught up in too much, just to kind of go, yeah, well, this just is, and somehow that kind of provides a little bit of solace sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I might even invite you at the end after I just talk briefly about some slides to maybe have a little practice with me and see if there's anything that you'd like to add as well. Yeah, thank you. So I'd really like to just talk about a few things that Mika has really shown her sort of experience of, I guess, which some people here might really be able to relate to, because I think Mika's very generously let us have an insight into her heart and her mind and her body through over the past, 4 or so years, really. And just to broaden that out a little bit, I guess, I'd like to explain a little bit about how our emotions and our physiology and our nutrition that Claire talked about earlier, our behaviour, our interactions with other people, to sort of give you a little bit of a framework to sort of maybe help you understand where you are at right now, and to perhaps we'll sort of build on there to look at some strategies that can help. So, Mark, if you don't mind putting on the next slide for me. Thank you very much. So what we have here is a graph that might help us to sort of understand where we are at in any sort of one moment. So this resilient zone here in the middle describes how we are when we are managing things pretty well. We might be feeling good, we might be feeling creative, able to solve problems, we might be feeling calm in our body here, we might be able to, really have good discussions and interactions and feel like interacting with other people. We might be able to get things done, we might have enough energy, we might be able to make some good choices around our food and our activities, and we feel like, engaging in resourcing activities that can keep us in this zone as well. And it's the resilient zone because it's when we are really actively, you know, even if it's not intentionally, taking care of life in various ways, including ourselves and our bodies. And we could call that the well-being zone as well, the calm connected zone. We know that for those of us who are interested in sort of biology, our vagus nerve that produces sort of most of the information going up and down of our brain in terms of how our body's functioning, in terms of breathing and digestion and managing, coping with difficult situations, and also resting and digesting. So that vagus nerve, so the ventral vagus nerve is really activated here. So our muscles are calm, but we've got a bit of energy, and we're in that sort of digestion. We can really easily sort of shift into rest when we need to, and recognize that. Now, wouldn't it be awesome if we could be in that zone all of the time? But life is not like that, and our bodies are not like that too, because we can get bumped out of this resilient zone up into the high zone. And Mika's talked to us just about how big things like a cancer diagnosis can shift us up into that stressed out high zone, but also that low zone of depression. And in fact, every day we are moving up and down the resilient zone and in and out of the high and low zone for a whole range of reasons, sometimes really big things that go on in our life, big news, but also sometimes just the more smaller everyday challenges of life too. And it might be when we're having a look at our finances that might sort of spin us up or down, or puzzling about an interaction with somebody. So we can be moving up and down in that resilient zone and be bumped sort of up or down into the low zone. There can be times in our life where that resilient zone is actually really small and it really narrows. We're all born with a different sort of breadth of the resilient zone, depending on our genetics and what might have been going on for our mother when we're in utero. And then various times in our life where it just really feels sometimes so small that maybe we haven't even got one and we can't like hit that anymore. The good news is that we are able to take some actions to, you know, increase that as much as we can, but knowing that it's really normal for that to change, and that we may not, you know, even be in it at all for some long periods of time in our life, which is when we're really uncomfortable, because if we're up in the high zone, everything's fast. The brain is working really fast, the breathing and the heart rate and the blood pressure, digestion shuts down a little bit here. We're in that sympathetic mode of the vagus nerve. We're in fight or flight. And so we've got our defenses on because we feel threatened in some way. Our health, it could be relationships with other people. There can be many, many things that bump us in there. And while that's really normal, because there are times when we really need to focus, it can be helpful to have a bit of this sympathetic activation going on, because it means that we sharpen our focus and we concentrate, and we can sometimes perform some pretty good problem solving here. And sometimes we can also be a lot more assertive in this zone as well. We can really make us, you know, sharpen our strengths in some ways. But sometimes if we're too high up in that high zone, that's when we sort of get flooded and we can't make decisions, we can't think clearly. Everything is just too switched on, we're too wide, not able to sleep at all. And it can be a bit of a problem if we get stuck up there. So if we get stuck up in this high zone, then that's where it can sort of turn into anxiety, and we might need to really attend to those emotions and that physiology and really do something about it. We can do something in terms of our nutrition, as Claire has mentioned, and Mika mentioned the internal and the external resources that we can you know, apply at times, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. But sometimes we just have to ride the wave of that as well and realise that, this is actually pretty normal reaction to what's going on in my life here. I can see what's going on, and sometimes that recognition and that sort of, this is where I am and I can see where it is, and maybe that's just how it is for this short space of time, can make it a little bit easier for us to be in there and even help us to sort of settle it a bit, even just that recognition. That low zone where we might get bumped down is sometimes a consequence of being in the high zone for quite a while, because it's so exhausting. Having that activity in the mind and the body and the emotions, and it's not something that we are really able to maintain for too long before we go like into exhaustion and energy depletion, and our motivation and capacity to think properly is again affected, but this time not because the mind is buzzing, but because it's like that sludge or that freezing that Mika mentioned, where we're just overwhelmed and we're into that, like imagine the turtle retracting into that into the shell. We've really gone into that shutdown mode. We might not really feel like interacting with anybody when we're in the really low zone, and even though it's very normal and a natural thing for us to be in this phase or mode of being from time to time, we don't want to get stuck there, and it can be pretty uncomfortable to be in that really low zone when we're struggling to get the basics done, and we might find ourselves sort of feeling like we've got depression. So if we're in either that high zone or that low zone for too long, and doctors talk about that being, you know, a couple of weeks or more most days, then, you know, that's when you really do need to seek some help. And we can have that team of people that Mika talked about before that might be able to help us, but also there are some things that we can do as well to help us to shift out of that high and that low zone. So let's talk about that a little bit more. And one of the first things that we can do is actually just to tune in to ourself and to see which zone we're in and what that's like. And even if you're just watching this webinar, you might like to do that now. You might like to get a little bit curious about, well, which zone am I in at the moment? Am I right now in the high zone, the okay zone, or the low zone? So I'll pause for a moment and let you think about that yourself. And then not only just which zone, but whereabouts in the zone. Are you out in the middle? Are you near one of those blue lines? And also, how do you know that? So we might shift to the next slide, please, Mark. Thank you. And these circles here refer to different sensations that we experience in our body. And of course, it's not the exhaustive list. There's plenty of others, but it can be the main things that we might notice when we tune into ourselves to determine which zone we're in. But it's sensations and the stuff that's going on in the body that will give us a real sense of where we are. And it will also give us so much information in the body about our health, our emotions, because emotions are felt in the body as well. So if you can think back to the last time, maybe when you felt a bit sad, you might have felt something like a bit of a sinking feeling in your guts or some heaviness there. The last time you felt frustrated, or you might have noticed tension and energy in the muscles. So emotions are felt in our body as well as our heart and our mind, but the body is often the place that gives us extra information than just what's going on in the head. It might be a way to really intervene. So if we know that we're holding tension in our body because we're thinking about something that we can't do anything about, we might be able to at least ease perhaps the muscles in the body. We might be able to just ease that sensation. so that we have just a little bit more sort of peace and ease. It also gives us another place than the head. So you might be able to relate to being sort of stuck in your mind a bit, particularly perhaps at 3 a.m. in the morning some nights. You might notice how we can really ruminate on things that we might be really worried about. But sometimes, even though it can be great to think, sometimes the timing is not right. We don't want to be thinking when we're trying to listen to somebody that we love and that we care about, but the mind's sort of going to those places, or we want to be focusing on something else. So the body can also just provide another place to be. It is, of course, not easy to be in the body when you have some illness, or pain or discomfort or strong emotions in your body as well. But there's a bit of a problem with when we sort of try to stop feeling. We sort of almost like cut off, cut the body off, and we just try to, relate to the world in our minds and thinking and without feeling, because then we can't take in any of that good stuff, and we can't also take care of what arises for us in a wise manner. We might just push through things and make things worse. We might not attend to things in a timely manner. If we're not able to be with our body in some way, then we also can't make the right decisions about what might be the best thing for us to do in this moment, because things change over time. And ultimately, we're the only ones who know and can know how we're feeling and what's going on in our body and what those sensations are like. So even to communicate to our medical professionals, we really need to be able to have accurate information about what's going on our body. So mindfulness can help us to feel a little bit more comfortable and able to tolerate what's going on in our body if we use the language of sensations like we have up here. So we might be able to think about the different temperatures in our body. So sometimes anger, frustration might feel hot. Sometimes we might have some painful parts of our body that feel hot as well. But there might be also a different sort of temperature there. And we might notice changes in our breathing or in our muscles. We might notice all the little sensations around twitching or trembling or shaking. And what happens is that the mind will tend to interpret those sensations. We might perhaps notice a little bit of discomfort in the body, and then the mind goes, that's the pain. And then it can be very easy when we're just living in the mind to be stuck into the interpretations and the meaning making of the pain, because that's the mind's job, to do all of that sort of thinking about it. Because of the negativity bias, we might end up going, I hate this. Why can't they do something about it? It might really spin us off into types of thinking that can really increase our stress. So being able to shift our attention into the body and go, okay, hang on here. Can I just touch into that discomfort just a little bit? Like, where is it located in my body? What are the sensations like here? What sort of temperature is there? Is it dense, or is it sort of soft around there? Is it sharp or dull sort of sensations? Just sort of tend into that. Actually, not only gives us all that information, but it actually helps to regulate our stress response to it. If that's too much, what you might instead want to do is find somewhere else in your body that feels different and take your attention there. So is there another place in my body that feels different, feels a little bit more pleasant or neutral, if there's no pleasant place, that instead of feeling that heat maybe feels a bit cooler, that instead of feels so hard, that maybe feels a little looser, that maybe instead of this sort of fast movement that's uncomfortable for me, is there somewhere that feels a bit more still? Is there somewhere else for me to be in my body? Even if it's sometimes just the tip of the nose or the tip of the toes, somewhere else that feels a bit different. what Mika told us about, you know, sometimes opening up to what might be different. And that might be in terms of the body, but of course it might be other parts of our life or other support systems as well. But it's that concept of finding somewhere that's different and noticing what might be a bit more pleasant or going well or something in our life, so we can practice that skill even in our body as well as other ways that we resource ourselves. So if you'd like to, you could even just try now to locate somewhere in your body where you feel pressure. And gravity's holding us to this earth, so you'll no doubt feel pressure from maybe the chair that you're sitting on or where your feet make contact with the floor. You can just feel that pressure, and there's no right or wrong with it. You can just feel it. Turn your attention inwards, and you might notice if there's somewhere else in your body that feels less pressure. Maybe the front of your body. And maybe there's somewhere in your body that feels warm or hot. And it might be a small little part of your body or a larger section. And then there might be a place in your body that feels cooler than that you can attend to. Might be able to feel a part of your body that is heavy, or feel the weight of your body somewhere. Or feel a sensation, like maybe in your belly or your chest, that feels heavy. And again, you don't need to really go into the center of it. If that's uncomfortable for you, you can just play around the edges of it. When your mind takes over with the meaning making, you might like to just go back to sensing it in your body. So from mind to body. And is there somewhere in your body that feels lighter? And is there somewhere in your body where you can feel movement? A pretty obvious place might be with the breath, but there could also be pulsing. There could be a bit of twitching. You might want to sort of rock or move in your chair as well. Where can you feel movement? And just let yourself experience movement. And then, is there somewhere that you can locate relative stillness? Of course, there's always movement in our body as the oxygen and blood circulates through our body. So much going on there. But where's relatively still? And then if you like to end this little exercise, broaden your awareness from those locations in your body to getting a sense of all of those parts and all of those sensations just held within the one body that you have. Right from the top of your head down to the bottom of your feet, and the front and the back, the sides of your body. Perhaps feeling your body on the surface that you're on, feeling your clothes or blanket on your skin, the air. The range of sensations, moment to moment, changing as well. So depending on what's going on for you in your life and in your body, you may find it useful to just every now and then just relate to an emotion or some discomfort in your body in this way, attending to the sensations of it, not just thinking about it. But also, it can be so important for our well-being to notice what it's like when we're engaged in things that give us a little bit of joy. Where all the different things that you might enjoy in life, the cup of tea or the sound of a bird or a child laughing or the feeling of someone's hand in yours or your soft warm bed or whatever it might be, those little things that can give us lots of joy if we just let them, if we open to them and if we let our body feel them. That's what will really shift us into well-being, if we can really let ourselves soak up those moments and feel the lightness that we might get in the chest or the easing of the muscles when we experience something that we can relate to with a sense of joy or satisfaction. Yeah. So thank you, Mark. Let's have a look at the next slide. And it talks about the mind stuff and the different ways that we can manage difficulties. And Mika's touched on each of these in her story for us as well. So there's sort of three ways we can go into problem solving. And again, we have to really just be able to settle ourselves with that high zone and that low zone just enough. So to be able to engage the brain so that it's not just frozen or too overwhelmed. So one of the ways to think about how we might sort of problem solve when we're in that low zone and we just can't think is to just start to move a little bit. So if we feel like we immobilized, then we might be able to just do something little, whether it be wiggling fingers and toes, stretching a little bit, jiggling a little bit, even if we don't feel like it, if we feel like we need to just shift ourselves a little bit from low up so that we can engage this brain a bit, moving the body in any way. It might be just being able to swing yourself up onto the edge of the bed and sitting there and breathing. Just one thing at a time that might be able to help us to move. It might be some few stretches. It might be just walking around the room, walking around the block, whatever you're able to do. But movement can just help to then engage that sort of problem-solving brain a little bit. The brain is a problem-solving machine, so sometimes it's just about getting out of the way of it a little bit, enabling it to just do its own job by getting towards that okay zone as much as we can. So if we're in that high zone, that might mean slowing our body down. So one of the ways that we might be able to do that is to just ground ourselves. So head is all over the place, the body's fast. Can we make contact with the ground and let that solid, stable surface, remind ourselves that we can be held and we can make contact with something that is solid in our life. So that might be by walking. If we've got a lot of energy in our body, sometimes we might want to just sort of keep moving, even if we just slowly slow it down a little bit, and just to help us contain ourselves, feel the feet as we're walking along, or sit down in a chair and feel the body. So you could do that right now, whether you're pacing as you listen to this, or whether you're sitting in the chair, feeling that solid surface. If the breath is a comfortable place for you, you might be able to feel that breath coming in and out of your body at your nose or your mouth. That could be another thing that feels a little bit settling or grounding for you. And at any moment of the day, we can always just bring our attention to that grounding that in some way makes sense for us, and that can help us to problem solve. Sometimes, though, problem solving would just tie us up in knots. So we can overuse this problem solving part of our brain. That can sometimes lead us into the high or the low zone sometimes, because we're trying to solve problems that maybe aren't ours to solve or don't really have an easy solution, and we can just be overusing that. So then sometimes we might have to see if there's another way to manage difficulties, and that might be by meaning making. So how we interpret our situation or ourselves or what other people are doing or what's happening in the world will definitely have an impact on how we feel. And I think one example of that might be how other people might respond to us. Let's say if they find out that we're not well, and they're having their own reactions around this and their own meaning making, which can likely be a form of their own stuff being triggered, because other people are obviously in the the high or the low zone all the time also. So if we make it really all about us and really personalize, have I done something, or why can't they see mine? Like, it's a really normal human response that we make things really personal about us, but sometimes it might not be. So sometimes just shifting the meaning of somebody else's behavior or what's going on, thinking about it in a different way can be helpful. Yeah, they're on their own, in their own zone at the moment. Doesn't mean it's not going to hurt, but it might just take the sting out for you to reframe it. Maybe they're struggling with that. We don't always know what's going on in someone else's life, even if they're really close friends with us. So sometimes thinking about something a little bit different, wondering if we're taking it a little bit too personally, maybe it's not just about us, might be a way to just shift the meaning. And that sort of meaning making, is there another way to think about it, can be applied to lots of different things in our life. Another strategy we have to manage difficulties is to actually be emotion focused. And often that's not our first go-to. When we have strong emotions in our life, we tend to actually go to problem solving and thinking about things, meaning making, trying to solve problems, just because we're wired that way, really. So emotion focused is when we do that thing that Mika really referred to so beautifully when she said she has a little strategy, her little battery, her AAAs of acknowledge, accept and attend. I think that would be a really useful way for us to take from here about how to be emotion focused, because if we have some emotions and we don't attend to them, then they will in themselves keep us stuck in the high or the low zone. So we really need to attend to it. We're having this reaction and these emotions because they're messages for us. You know, sadness means a loss or a potential loss. So when our alarm system's going on because of something that's going on in our life or an emotion, we sort of really need to attend to it, or we'll just stay stuck on. So acknowledging, so naming our emotion, feeling it in our body and naming it. I think I'm actually feeling hurt about this. So there's this thing that happens where we're just activating that right part of our brain and our nervous system to help regulate ourselves, even when we just name the emotion. It's been called by Dan Siegel, a psychiatrist who works a lot in neuroscience, and you can look him up. He's pretty cool. He says, name it to tame it. So the minute that we actually name up how we feel, maybe more than one emotion at once, that actually helps us to regulate it. So that can be a really first step. What am I feeling? And to be able to make a name for our emotion, we actually also have to sense into our body, so we can use those sensation words to just locate it and feel it. I'm feeling angry and this is where it is, and my muscles are tense here and I can feel the heat here, or whatever it might be. Accepting is this is part of the process of accepting it, but also just to go, this is what I'm feeling. And you know what? It's okay. It's natural and it's really normal for me to be having this experience and emotion. I don't have to like it, but it's human. Whatever I'm feeling is whatever I'm feeling. It's meant to be here in this moment. And if I push it aside and ignore it, then it's just going to sit there in some way, and it will come out in our health and our mental health if we don't attend to it in some way. Doesn't mean getting stuck in it though. If we're getting stuck in stuff, we can take care of it in some way. We can maybe do something that might make us feel a little bit better. We might be able to use the external resources that Mika sort of talked about, or we might be able to internally, we might be able to think about what it is that we already do to cope with hard stuff, because we've already tackled hard stuff in our life, and there might be things that we can just forget about when we're in the middle of hard stuff, and we might need to remember, we might need to pick up that hobby, or pick up that phone to call someone we haven't spoken to, even if we don't feel like it. But if we know that it is probably going to be helpful for us to do that. So learning to manage our own emotions ourselves, but also taking advantage of activities and groups and people and around us as well is really important. But attending in some way doesn't have to be much. It might be just like, wow, I think what I need is some space to go for a walk, or I think I need a rest, whatever it might be that helps you to acknowledge, accept, and then attend. And that would be what we call emotionally intelligent way to sort of manage that. So let's go to the next slide, please. And another way to think about this emotion-focused way is to go, I feel something, I recognise something, what's happening? So if we look at the orange slide here, we locate what we feel in our body, and we notice the sensations, we name up that emotion, and then we might notice also, what's going on? How am I moving my body? How am I being with my body that might, be helpful or not? What's going on in my mind? What am I believing in this moment? Or am I caught up in a bit of a trance of thinking that might not really be very helpful? So we always sort of start with our body, and then our heart, and then we sort of move to our mind as well to get as much information as we can to know what's going on for us, and then to see what there might be able to be taken care of. And you might be looking at this going, oh yeah, I can have a bit of a crack at this, and I hope so. But if you feel like you need a little bit more sort of support with that, then you could come along to a mindfulness program through the Cancer Council. You could go to a yoga class as well, because yoga actually really helps us to notice these sensations and to be with these sensations, and then also to expand our awareness to the rest of our experience. So that can be a really helpful place to start, actually, depending on what's going on for you in your life and your health. Sometimes seeing a social worker or a psychologist or your doctor might be a way to sort of start with this as well. And of course, there are times when it's just too big to be with what's going on for me right now. So that's where we might take our attention to external. So we might watch a movie, we might go for a walk, we might get a drink of water, we might pick up the phone, we might distract ourselves for a while. We might do something nice for ourselves. We might just actually get a task done that's going to make us feel better and just give us a bit of focus outside of our body, because that's okay too. Sometimes it's a matter of just titrating that a bit, just tapping in and out of it, not getting too into it. And then that will take us to this next slide, which is knowing what's going on and knowing that everybody is capable of being mindful in some way. When we're not mindful, we're in autopilot, and we will do that all of the time. And day to day, moment to moment, we'll be switching from mindfulness and into autopilot. And it's this awareness that we can grow of that helps us to be more intentional in our life and more mindful. And then My last slide for today is just to pick up again on that resourcing ourselves. So when we can't be with what's inside, being with something that's a resource. And you know what, if you're really unwell, you don't even need to have the energy or the mobility to be able to go and resource yourself with people on a social event, or to take your dog for a walk, or to actually go to places, or you know, do activities, or spend time with objects like a cozy blanket, or, you know, be looking at a great picture or that you love, or your photo album or something. There are all different ways to resource yourself, but you can actually just remember and recall that. So if you'd like to do this last little exercise with me, bring to mind a person or a pet, a place and an object, a thing or an activity that at some point in your life you have found gives you a sense of well-being in some way, makes you happy or satisfied or connected. So it could be a place that you went to as a kid and haven't been back to, or somebody who's not in your life anymore. Or it might be the cat that's sitting on your lap right now. I just want you to think about or remember that resource, just one, in as much detail as possible. And I want you to remember what it is that you appreciate about this resource. And if that negative mind kicks in, as it likely does with us, to shift back to remembering all the details and what it is that you love or appreciate about this resource. Soak up the memory. And feel it in your body as well, like if just thinking about this, remembering it. What can you sense in your body? If you can't sense much, that's okay too. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we need to practice something a few times too. But just soaking that up. Just to finish here, we can let go of the slides if you like, Marg, and just pulling your attention out of that, knowing that at any time of the day you can tap into remembering your own resource, and just shift into well-being around that. But also just to let you know that if you do feel like you need to connect with another service or another person, your GP is a really good place to start, and a mental health care plan can be a good way to have cheaper access to a psychologist. And if you don't connect with the first person, then keep going and find someone else. And you don't have to keep going back to get a new mental health care plan either. And also just to let people know in Tassie about a couple of services that are fairly new and which can be really helpful places for anyone to go to. So we now have some places where you can go and seek some help for yourself around a whole range of issues, financial, any networks, one-on-one talking, housing, anything for yourself or for someone else. And you don't get turned away, and they will help you to connect in with someone else. And in Hobart, that's the Mental Health Integration Hub. I'm not actually associated with any of these, but I know about them, and they're beautiful new spaces, really welcoming. You can go and have a cuppa, and there's some friendly faces there. So that's in Elphinston Road in North Hobart, and it's pretty brand new. And in Launceston, there's the Head to Health Centre in Canning Street, 62 Canning Street. That's similar, beautiful building, lots of spaces to just relax in or connect with somebody. And Devonport and Burnie are going to have some head to health centres coming soon as well. So they're really great spaces. Anyone can just rock up there and seek some support if you need to. But of course, this beautiful Cancer Council and the amazing support workers that are there are definitely a first place to start as well. So thank you very much. Anything you'd like to add, Mika? Putting you on the spot again.
I think just finally, we've heard for years, about the benefits of maintaining physical well-being, and there are lots of, do a certain amount of exercise on this many days a week and that sort of thing. I think it's time we said the same thing about emotional well-being. It deserves just as much attention as physical well-being, and finding what works for you, and that may change over time, but putting it in place and trying to be regular with it, as we try to be regular where we can be with physical well-being. It's just as important, perhaps if not more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda and Mika. So much wonderful wisdom and knowledge to share there with us all. And great to hear you, Miranda, just going through some of those mental health supports that are coming in, quite, as you said, in Hobart, particularly quite new facilities, and really important for people to know about that. Also, of course, as you mentioned, we have our cancer support centres here at Cancer Council Tasmania. We have a support centre in Sandy Bay in the south, in Howick Street in Launceston, just near the Launceston General Hospital, and please come in and see us. We are open 9:30 to 4:30. I think Mark's going to pull that picture up for us of the Launceston Centre. They are really beautiful centres designed to be warm and welcoming, and very much focused on a non-clinical model, so that you can feel at home and welcomed when you come into those spaces, and it's a real respite from those clinical centres and treatment centres that you're accessing as someone going through cancer treatment. So yes, please do come in and see us, or give us a call. There's the photo of part of our Launceston Centre. So yeah, we are there. It's a drop-in centre, no appointments necessary, and you can access a lot of our services there, like our complementary therapies, wig libraries, and talk to our supportive care staff. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our three guest speakers, Mika, Miranda and Claire. I just think it's so great that this is a recorded session, because I think people will be going back and listening to pieces of this and parts of this that resonate most strongly. There's a lot of information and a lot of really important wisdom being shared. So thank you to all three of you for being part of our webinar today. It's so amazing to hear your lived experience, Mika, and to tap in, Miranda and Claire, to your professional knowledge and that deeper knowledge that resides in you as well through the work that you've done. So thank you so very much. Mika, I loved what you said about, you used a metaphor of a garden growing and needing to nurture that garden's health and really paying attention to that garden. And I really heard that metaphor, and it's so easy to let things go and suddenly look at your garden and think, maybe I haven't taken the care there. So, and very much agree too with what you said about mental and emotional and physical health all being important and so interwoven as well. I think it's actually a mistake to think of them as separate, because we need to be looking after our whole selves as a holistic being, and not really separated into physical and emotional, because one impacts the other and is part of the other, and we are mind, body and heart, each one of us. So need to be nurturing all aspects of ourselves. So just on our final slide for today, just looking at some of the support and information that you can access, and please do call us anytime at Cancer Council Tasmania. The number's up there on this screen. We're on the phone 9 till 5 weekdays, please call us. The 1300 number is the Tasmanian team, so we can really help you navigate your cancer experience. And if we're unable to help with a need that you have, we can refer you into other services and help you find your way towards the support that you need. And we are really here, and our team are so passionate about the work that they do, so please connect with us. The 13 11 20 number up on the screen is a national information and support line. That's available Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. That links you with generally someone in Victoria, and you can talk to an oncology nurse through that number. So that's a good one if you're needing some clinical advice or something of more along those lines, or if you can't get through to our team in Tassie, it's a good backup. There's our online community as well. So if you are looking for online forums, blogs and support groups and other resources, that online community is excellent. And our website as well has all of our resources in PDF form. A heap of information is sitting there on our website, so please do go and have a look. And of course, if we're not available and you're experiencing distress, Lifeline run an amazing 24-hour telephone crisis support service, 13 11 14, and do a fantastic job there. If you are feeling pretty desperate after hours and can't get a hold of us, please do go to them for that support and come to us in those business hours. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for connecting with this information and connecting with us here at Cancer Council Tasmania. We love the work that we do. We're here for you. We are here to serve our community. So please connect with us if you're needing support. And thank you again to our guest speakers.
Thank you, folks.
You're still recording.
Oh.